The Battle of Rook's Rest was a pivotal battle in the Dance of the Dragons and the first true on-screen battle we see in House of the Dragon. But what exactly happened and why? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we're covering House of the Dragon in depth, as well as the wider world of Ice and Fire. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please check out their podcast and YouTube channel. There's a link in the description. The start of the Dance of the Dragons was actually quite slow, both sides exchanging assassination attempts and princely deaths while trying to gather allies. But as is so often the case, it was the Riverlands that saw the first armies face each other. On the show, Sir Criston Cole and Aemond Targaryen began planning the campaign well before the war proper broke out. In the books, they clearly planned ahead as well, though we are not privy to any particulars. At first, they believed they'd have to convince Aegon or the council of their idea, but when Cole was promoted to Hand, it became much easier to execute. They could just prosecute the war in the king's name without consulting him at all. The plan was fairly simple. Move quickly to the nearest houses in the Crown Lands and demand their submission. The submitted castles would add their troops to Cole's army, and he would then move on to the next castle, repeating the process until the army was of sufficient size to take on the Riverlands. Originally, the plan was to bring Aemond along, to make it absolutely certain that no castles held out. Vhagar is very convincing, after all. But Cole didn't want dragons as part of his army early in the campaign. He wanted soldiers only, so as to make his army appear vulnerable to an enemy dragon, which he would then trap and kill. That was the cunning plan. In both show and books, Cole takes the castles of Rosby and Stokeworth, followed by the town of Duskendale, sacking it due to its loyalty to Rhaenyra. Lord Darklyn of Duskendale faces his execution bravely and calls Sir Criston by the name he is remembered by in the pages of A Song of Ice and Fire, Kingmaker. But this campaign nearly sees his king unmade. Though Rook's Rest has little value in a vacuum, it had great strategic value at the time and was the perfect place for Sir Criston's trap. 4 reasons stand out. First, it's quite a small castle, so even if the attempt to trap a dragon didn't work, they could claim another easy victory. Second, Rook's Rest is ruled by House Staunton, and Lord Staunton is a member of Rhaenyra's council. It looks bad for a monarch to stand by and do nothing while their close ally's home is destroyed. If she can't protect those closest to her, she can't protect the realm. Third, in the show at least, it is said that the Greens have seized all the safe ports in Blackwater Bay. If the Blacks allow Rook's Rest to fall, they won't have a safe landing spot for troops or ships. And fourth, Rook's Rest is relatively close to Dragonstone, with lots of nearby tree cover where Vhagar can hide, and even a convenient cliff edge to sneak up on other dragons, a great spot for an ambush. So the Blacks had ample reasons to come to Rook's Rest's aid, but as of yet, they had no armies. Thus, the only thing they could do to defend Rook's Rest was send a dragon, as Team Green seems to have calculated. Show Rhaenyra wished to fly, but was shut down by her council. Book Rhaenyra was incapable of flying, we're told, as she was still recovering from the death of her infant Visenya. Prince Jacaerys was rejected for his youth and status as heir. Thus, in both book and show, the clear choice was Rhaenys on Melies. The Red Queen, ridden by the Queen Who Never Was their largest dragon. Sir Criston likely knew this as well, though he surely hoped for a stroke of luck, meaning that Rhaenyra would come in person. In show, Baela and her dragon seem to have been aged up quite a bit, so there is a legitimate question why she did not accompany her grandmother, but in the books that's not really an issue. Moondancer is too small to ride until later in the war. So Criston Cole's lure worked. The problem was, in the show, his lure was so good that his own king fell for it. Driven by insecurity as much as alcohol, he wanted to prove that he was capable in battle. Like Rhaenyra, his council didn't want him at risk, but unlike Rhaenyra, Aegon didn't listen to his councillors, or his mother, who was rather harsh about it. But Alicent wasn't wrong that he was better off doing nothing. In the books, though, the result was nearly identical. It seems that it was always the plan for Aegon to be there. While it might seem risky to deploy the king in an ambush, and show Criston was certainly against the idea, it's not hard to imagine book Aegon forcing the issue himself, simply ordering Cole to include him in the plan. As Hand of the King, Cole would have had no choice but to obey the order, even if all of Aegon's council agreed with him. Or it's entirely possible that Book Aegon and Cole didn't worry about the risk, or that Book Aemond wanted his brother there in hopes that he would be killed. There's a lot left unsaid in that section. Anyway, that's the setup. Let's get to the action. The book version is a bit more drawn out, but less detailed. The Greens began a siege, but took their time. They wanted Lord Staunton to alert Dragonstone of their peril. After all, Dragonstone wouldn't send a dragon into their trap if they had no idea Rook's Rest was under assault. They encircled the castle, built siege engines, and waited. 9 days later, Rhaenys arrived on Melies and began to attack the besiegers. The show version is similar enough in this regard, just with less waiting. The battle on the ground was no doubt hard fought, but of very little consequence given what the presence of the dragons brought. Many lives were lost in order to set the trap to bring those dragons together. In both book and show, Melies strafed the Greens a few times and was largely unaffected by the arrows and other projectiles sent at her and Rhaenys. In the book, this dance of three dragons is over quickly. Sunfire and Vhagar emerge from either side of Melies, yet she does not choose to flee. It seems that she attempts to target King Aegon, perhaps because he was an easier target, and killing the enemy king is almost always a good idea. In both versions, Melies and Sunfire become entangled in the skies, and Melies gets by far the best of it. In the show, Aegon seems to yell Dracarys too soon, and Sunfire's gout of flame causes him to lose sight of Melies, who circles around below into his blind spot to attack from below. In the book, Vhagar quickly descends on them both and joins the fray. Unable to stay aloft while entangled, all three slam into the ground quickly. After a struggle on the ground, soon enough, Melies and Rhaenys are killed. Sunfire and Aegon are nearly killed, while Vhagar and Aemond emerge essentially unscathed. Did Aemond have no other choice here? Would his brother have been killed rather than severely wounded if he hadn't slammed into them both? There is no answer to this question. The Maesters do not know what was on Aegon's mind or in his heart. There's little evidence in the books that he was blamed for what happened, but we do not know what was said behind closed doors. The book version of the battle essentially ends here, with Sunfire and Aegon alive, but barely, and Rook's Rest captured shortly after the three-way struggle on the ground. Cole sent the head of Melies and Lord Staunton back to King's Landing. The show version is less certain, yet still ambiguous. Aemond prepares to spring the trap, but just as he's getting ready to join the fray, he sees Sunfire pass above. He curses his brother for being an idiot and then waits. Why did he wait? He may have decided in that instant to let his brother suffer the consequences, but it might be more likely that he was concerned Rhaenys would flee if she saw two dragons coming at her. Either way, he was more concerned for the plan than for his brother. After a few moments of Melies dominating Sunfire, Aemond made his move. Instead of slamming into the entangled red and gold dragons as in the books, show Aemond has Vhagar breathe fire at them, and Sunfire takes the worst of it. This doesn't necessarily mean that Sunfire was hit by more dragonfire, however. Dragons grow more resistant to fire as they age, and Melies was quite a bit older than Sunfire, so it's entirely possible both were bathed equally in Vhagar's flames, but the younger dragon suffered more harm from it. Was there any way for Aemond to guide Vhagar to attack only Melies when she was entwined with Sunfire? We don't know. So again, this is ambiguous, though again Aemond certainly wasn't prioritising Aegon's safety, and afterwards he doesn't seem to show any remorse. In the show, Rhaenys had another opportunity to flee, but again opted to fight on, likely knowing it would be her death. Though the odds were not in her favour, the payoff would be enormous if she managed to beat Aemond and Vhagar. The war would take a huge turn in the Blacks' favour, even if it cost them Melies. Vhagar was vital to the Greens' campaign, and if she had died at Rook's Rest, the war would likely have been much shorter. Thus, it was extremely brave of Rhaenys in both book and show to stay and fight, and this tells us it was not bravery for bravery's sake, but an attempt to end the war in a stroke. Yes, it would have been a lucky stroke, but not an impossible one. As we're told in Fire and Blood, against Vhagar alone, she might have had some chance. Show Rhaenys was consistently on the side of peace, thus it is fitting that she took a path that might have ended the war almost as quickly as it started. Rhaenys steered Meleys directly at Vhagar, then attempted to sweep under her, likely in an attempt to circle back and attack before the slower, older dragon could turn. It certainly makes sense that Meleys would attempt to outmaneuver the less agile dragon, rather than coming directly to grips with a larger foe. The tactic doesn't work, however. Vhagar was able to snatch Meleys before she could pass underneath. Then they exchanged blasts of flame and tried to bite and tear at each other. This is what real-life birds of prey do when they engage in aerial combat. Other than the breathing fire bit, obviously. And the showrunners have revealed that they used this as a model for dragon dueling. Unable to stay aloft while entwined, they spiraled rapidly. The dragons separated just before impact, with the larger dragon unable to stay aloft, slamming into the ground. The force of Vhagar's landing was immense. Horses and men flew in all directions from the concussive force, and that was what knocked Sir Criston Cole unconscious. Meleys flew off but was unable to see Vhagar due to the enormous amount of dust kicked up when she slammed into the ground. Rhaenys would have reasonably expected that Vhagar would need time to get aloft again. We've seen how long it takes the oldest living dragon to get airborne, but this time she had help and a bit of luck. Remember that sheer cliff face where Rook's Rest was built? It was shown multiple times during and before the battle. Instead of having to build up speed to take off as per normal, Vhagar seems to have just taken a dive off the cliff, then stayed close to the rock wall in order to be unseen from above. If Aemond had taken her further out to sea, she'd have been visible, but sticking close to the cliffs, Rhaenys and Meleys were unable to see Vhagar from their vantage point. So it seems as though this is a bit of clever riding by Aemond, which worked to tragic perfection, emerging from Rhaenys' blind spot below the sheer face of the cliffs behind the castle. There was nothing more she could do. Vhagar got her jaws around Meleys' neck, and it was hopeless. This was all actually rather subtly foreshadowed on the show, just as the battle was beginning. During the opening moments of the battle, before the dragons joined, we see the assault on Rook's Rest begin, and as it does, we're given a voiceover of Rhaenyra speaking to Jace about the Song of Ice and Fire. As she talks, we can see the skull of the dragon Meraxes behind them. She died over on the Hellholt in Dawn with a scorpion bolt through the eye. You can see the damage to the skull around the eye. The rider of Meraxes was Aegon's sister, Rhaenys. Dying, Meraxes fell from the sky onto the castle below, breaking it. Like Rhaenys and Meraxes, Rhaenys and Meleys landed on the wall at Rook's Rest, breaking it and allowing the attackers to get inside the castle and take it. This all happened while Criston Cole was regaining consciousness. We hear Sir Gawain Hightower issue commands as he leads their troops into the breach, but Sir Criston is far more concerned with what happened to Aegon. Aemond arrived at the crash site before Criston, and we see him begin to sheath his sword just before Criston calls out to him. Was Aemond trying to kill his brother before Cole walked up on him? If so, was it mercy or ambition? If he was going to kill his brother, why was he putting his sword away before he heard Cole? On the other hand, why did he even have his sword out in the first place? There were no enemies outside the castle at any point during the battle. Perhaps it was just standard precaution. All of which again shows us that ambiguity was the writer's goal here. We're not meant to be sure either way. Not that that should stop us theorising. Let me know in the comments section if you think Aemond was actually trying to kill Aegon. Rook's Rest was costly for both sides. Team Black lost one of their most fearsome dragons, as well as the castle itself, and Team Green saw their king incapacitated, leaving them with just Vhagar to defend King's Landing, if we don't count Helena's Dreamfire. Perhaps even more importantly, it proved to be a massive escalation in the war. Both sides now know that the other is willing to deploy dragons not just in one-on-one combat, but alongside armies, and both sides have seen firsthand the horrors that brings. Even Sir Criston Cole, one of the few in the battle with prior war experience, was overwhelmed and traumatised. It was far worse than he expected, and he expected it to be terrible. If a hardened warrior, willing to execute lords and sack towns filled with innocents, is so deeply affected by what he saw, what does that mean for the other participants? And what does it mean for the horrors to come? The war is just getting started. If you'd like to see more videos like this, breaking down the story of the Dance of the Dragons or George R.R. Martin's world more broadly, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.